They said Christmas was canceled, too broke for a big gathering. I ate leftovers alone. That night, my niece went live, a full party, champagne, even a DJ. Everyone was there, except me. I stayed quiet until sister texted, "Can you send the $3,400 for rent?" I responded, "Delete my number. I don't fund liars." Then blocked her and shut down every transfer. By morning, I had 23 missed calls and one voicemail. "We want to explain. I, 34M, thought family meant something more than dollar signs and convenient lies, but my sister taught me otherwise on the coldest Christmas Eve I'd ever experienced." The text came on December 20th while I was finishing up some late work at the office. My sister told me Christmas was canceled this year because everyone was too broke for a big gathering. She explained how tough things had been for everyone, how the extended family just couldn't afford to do the usual celebration at her place like we had for the past 8 years. I felt disappointed but understood completely. Times had been rough for a lot of people, and I figured we'd just have a quiet holiday for once. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my apartment, heating up leftover Chinese food from 2 nights before. The silence felt heavier than usual, broken only by the occasional sound of neighbors celebrating through thin walls. I'd gotten used to my sister's house being the center of our family universe during holidays. Her spacious living room filled with cousins, aunts, uncles, and the familiar chaos of too many conversations happening at once. Without that tradition, Christmas felt hollow and strange. Around 9 that evening, I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up. My 17-year-old niece was going live on Instagram. I almost scrolled past it, but something made me tap the screen. What I saw made my stomach drop like I'd been punched. The camera panned across my sister's living room, which was absolutely packed with people. I recognized every single face. Our entire extended family was there, dressed up and laughing. Crystal champagne glasses caught the light from an elaborate setup I'd never seen at her place before. A professional DJ was set up in the corner where the old piano used to sit, bass thumping through my phone speaker. The dining table was loaded with catered food, not the potluck style we usually did, but expensive-looking platters arranged like something from a magazine. My niece giggled into the camera as she showed off the party, mentioning how amazing the surprise Christmas celebration turned out. She talked about how long they'd been planning this elaborate gathering, how everyone had chipped in to make it special. The camera caught my sister in the background, wearing a new dress and holding what looked like expensive wine, deep in animated conversation with our cousin. I watched for 20 minutes, my leftover lo mein getting cold on the coffee table. Every family member I'd expected to see was there. Every person who had supposedly been too broke to celebrate was dressed up and clearly enjoying an expensive party that had taken considerable planning and money to pull off. The realization hit me slowly, like ice water filling my lungs. This wasn't a last-minute gathering they decided to throw together. The decorations, the catering, the DJ, this had been planned for weeks, maybe months. Everyone knew about it except me. They had deliberately excluded me while feeding me lies about canceled celebrations and financial hardship. I turned off the live stream and sat in the dark for a long time, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The hurt was immediate and sharp, but underneath it was something else, a growing anger at being treated like someone who didn't deserve the truth. My sister and I had always had a complicated relationship, but I'd been the one family member she could count on when things got tough. Over the past 3 years, I'd helped her with rent payments, grocery money when her hours got cut, and even car repairs when her transmission died. She'd always been grateful, telling me how much it meant to have someone who cared enough to help family when they needed it. But apparently, that help came with a side of deception and exclusion. Christmas Day passed quietly. I didn't reach out to anyone, and surprisingly, no one reached out to me either. No casual texts asking how my holiday was going. No phone calls from family members feeling guilty about the night before. The silence told me everything I needed to know about how little my absence had been noticed or cared about. I spent the day thinking about every interaction with my sister over the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed. The requests for help had become more frequent lately, but she'd always framed them as temporary setbacks. She'd mentioned having trouble with bills, needing help with groceries, struggling to make ends meet as a single mother. I believed her completely because lying to family about financial problems seemed unthinkable to me. Now I wondered how much of it had been true and how much had been a convenient way to keep money flowing in my direction while keeping me isolated from family events I might have wanted to attend. The text came 3 days later, on December 28th, at 2:47 in the afternoon. My sister needed me to send her the monthly $3,400 for rent and utilities, like I'd been doing since October. She mentioned that her landlord was being difficult about late payments and that she really needed it transferred by the end of the day to avoid any problems. The amount wasn't small. It represented a significant chunk of my monthly income, money I'd been happy to contribute because I thought I was helping family during a genuinely difficult time. But seeing that number after watching the elaborate party she'd thrown while lying to my face about being broke changed everything. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before typing my response. I told her to delete my number and explained that I don't fund liars. Then I blocked her phone number, her social media accounts, and immediately logged into my banking app to shut down the automatic transfer I'd set up months ago. The feeling of cutting those financial ties was immediate relief mixed with residual anger. I'd been supporting her lifestyle while being excluded from the family gatherings that lifestyle helped fund. The money I'd been sending hadn't been keeping her afloat. It had been subsidizing parties I wasn't invited to attend. I also blocked several other family members who I realized had been part of the deception. If they could all coordinate an elaborate Christmas celebration while lying to me about it, they could figure out their finances without my help too. By the next morning, my phone showed 23 missed calls from various family members. The blocked numbers had tried to reach me, but the calls had been automatically rejected. I had one voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, probably someone calling from a different phone. The voicemail was my sister's voice, sounding panicked and desperate. She said they wanted to explain everything, that there had been a misunderstanding, and that I needed to call her back immediately because there was more to the story than I understood. She mentioned something about the rent being due and how cutting off the money had put her in a terrible position with her landlord. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it a second time. Update 1. The calls kept coming for the next week. Different family members tried reaching me from numbers I hadn't blocked yet. My cousin left a message saying everyone was worried about me and that I was overreacting to what had been an honest miscommunication. My aunt texted from her husband's phone, explaining that the Christmas party had been a surprise that got planned at the last minute, and that I shouldn't take it so personally. But I'd watched that Instagram live stream carefully. The level of coordination, the professional DJ, the catering, none of that gets arranged in a few days. Someone had put serious time, effort, and money into planning that celebration, which meant someone had been lying to me for weeks while asking me to fund their lifestyle. The most telling call came from my sister's ex-husband, who I'd always gotten along with well. He told me that he'd been asked to contribute money for the party planning back in November, and that everyone had been talking about keeping it adults only this year. He seemed genuinely confused about why I thought I should have been included, which told me everything about how my family actually viewed me. I wasn't family to them. I was a bank account that occasionally needed to be managed with the right lies and manipulation. On January 3rd, my sister showed up at my apartment building. The doorman called up to ask if I wanted to see her, and I told him no. She waited in the lobby for 2 hours, sending texts from a new number she'd gotten, begging me to come down and talk. She explained that she was facing eviction because the rent money hadn't come through, and that her landlord had already started the legal process. I watched from my window as she finally left and felt nothing but a cold satisfaction that actions were finally having consequences. Update 2. 3 weeks into January, I got a call at work from my niece. She'd somehow gotten my office number and called during my lunch break. She was crying, explaining that they were moving in with her grandmother because they'd been evicted. She asked why I was being so mean to her mom and why I couldn't just forgive whatever had happened over Christmas. Talking to her was the hardest part of the whole situation. She was 17 and genuinely didn't understand the depth of deception that had been going on. From her perspective, there had been a family party and now her uncle was refusing to help with rent money, which had led to them losing their apartment. I explained to her as gently as I could that adults sometimes make choices that have consequences, and that her mother had made some decisions about honesty and family relationships that I couldn't support anymore. I told her that I loved her and that if she ever needed anything directly, school supplies, help with college applications, emergency money, she could contact me. But I wouldn't be supporting her mother's household anymore. She seemed to understand, even though she was still upset. She mentioned that several family members had been talking about how stubborn and unreasonable I was being, but that she was starting to realize there were parts of the story the adults hadn't shared with her. In February, I heard through a mutual friend that my sister had moved back in with our parents, who live in a much smaller place about an hour outside the city. My niece had to change schools in the middle of her senior year. The family was calling it a temporary arrangement, but temporary has a way of becoming permanent when there are no other options. I felt bad for my niece, but not bad enough to resume funding a lifestyle built on lies and exclusion. Update 3. By March, the family dynamics had completely shifted. My parents called me for the first time since Christmas, asking if I wanted to come to Sunday dinner. When I asked if my sister would be there, my mother confirmed she would be, along with several other family members who wanted to clear the air about what had happened. I declined politely but firmly. I explained that there was nothing to clear up. I'd seen exactly who my family thought I was and how they treated me, and I was comfortable with the boundaries I'd established. My mother seemed surprised that I wasn't interested in working things out, as if months of lies and financial manipulation should be easily forgiven with a family dinner. The truth was, I discovered something valuable about myself during those months of isolation from family drama. My life was actually more peaceful without constantly worrying about who needed money and what crisis required my immediate attention. I'd been so focused on being the reliable family member who could solve everyone's problems that I'd never noticed how much energy it was draining from my own life. I started using the money I'd been sending my sister for things I actually wanted: better food, a gym membership, a vacation I'd been putting off for years. For the first time in a long time, I was living my life instead of funding other people's. In April, my cousin reached out with what he called a compromise. The family was planning a gathering for Easter, and everyone wanted me to come. He assured me that my sister had learned her lesson about honesty, and that she was ready to apologize for the misunderstanding about Christmas. I told him I appreciated the invitation, but that I'd made other plans. I didn't mention that my other plans involved staying home, ordering pizza, and enjoying a quiet weekend without family drama. The most interesting part was how little I missed the chaos. I'd thought family meant obligation and constant financial support, but I'd learned it was possible to love people from a distance while protecting yourself from their poor choices. My niece texted me in May to let me know she'd been accepted to 3 colleges with partial scholarships. I sent her a congratulations gift and offered to help with any remaining expenses for her education. She thanked me and mentioned that she was proud of me for standing up for myself, even though it had made things difficult for everyone else. That text meant more to me than any family reunion could have. The final update came in June when I ran into my sister at a grocery store near my parents' house. She looked older and tired, but she seemed genuinely surprised to see me. She asked if we could talk, and I agreed to listen. She apologized for the Christmas situation and admitted that she'd been planning the party for months while asking me for money. She explained that she'd been embarrassed about how dependent she'd become on my financial help, and that excluding me from family events had been her way of avoiding the guilt of taking so much money while not really considering me part of the inner family circle. The apology felt genuine, but it also confirmed everything I'd suspected. I thanked her for being honest, told her I forgave her, but explained that forgiveness didn't mean resuming the same relationship patterns that had led to the problem in the first place. She asked if there was any way we could rebuild some kind of relationship, and I told her that was possible, but it would have to be built on actual honesty and mutual respect rather than financial dependency and convenient lies. 6 months later, we exchange occasional texts and see each other at family events I choose to attend. The money requests stopped completely, and our interactions are more genuine because they're not built on her need for financial support. My niece started college in the fall, and I helped with her expenses directly rather than sending money through her mother. I learned that family relationships are much healthier when they're based on choice rather than obligation, and that sometimes the people who claim to need you the most are actually the ones who respect you the least. The Christmas party I wasn't invited to ended up being the best gift I never received. It showed me exactly where I stood and gave me the clarity to change my position.